Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for our final show and tell on our repairs technical alpha that we've been spending the weeks doing. I know a lot of you have been monitoring our progress and following us closely, either through our online media or by getting in touch with us directly. But for those of you that don't know, I'm Fraser Trickett and product owner from City of Lincoln Council for this round. And we've been working with Unboxed, and we've got our partners Royal Borough of Greenwich, South Kesteven and Southwark, and we're being closely supported by the MHCLG. But would you both move on to the next slide, please, Neil? Thank you very much. So what is the repairs alpha that we've been doing? It's to look into the technical feasibility of the common service pattern that we defined in the previous alpha, and to understand how we can actually look to implement this and make this a tangible product now. And we've been focusing on two methods of really doing that, and that would be either by evolving the market, and that's working with current suppliers out there and to understand how we can make the best use out of their system and take the learnings from the previous rounds, or actually if there's the opportunity to disrupt this and make a bigger change and move towards perhaps a common API in the market. Just again, so you're aware this is being recorded, and well, if you can save questions to the end, that would be fantastic. Next slide, please. Over to you, Sam.
Yep. Hi, everyone. So to start, we thought it would be a good opportunity for the local authorities of the project team to talk about different aspects of the project and how we've worked. So I'm going to start by talking about how we as a group collaborated on the project. So first of all, the members of the project group, so that's Unboxed and the local authorities, had daily communication pretty much throughout, and the communication was good, open and honest, which is what we wanted from the very start. And the work that's been carried out so far shows that councils can not only collaborate with each other, but we can and should continue to work where possible with external companies and from different sectors as well to get that different opinion and share of ideas. And speaking of working with external companies, we've worked with suppliers of existing systems during this project, including major housing system suppliers. And these conversations were conducted via Teams, and we also hosted a Tech UK event in which suppliers were invited to discuss the project and working together moving forward, again, sharing ideas and working in that collaborative approach. And from this, we learned that where possible, engagement with different sectors often leads to positive ways of working and new ideas coming through. It's important to mention at this point as well that we didn't want to just limit this project to just the local authorities that were on the project group. So we've engaged with other councils throughout via surveys, which some of you may have completed, and invitations to these show and tells, again, so that we can get their ideas about moving forward and to showcase what we have done so far as a project group. In order to achieve all of this, we've needed to use a variety of tools to enable us to work in this way. These included using things such as Slack for communication, Microsoft Teams and Google Docs, holding daily stand-ups on Google Meet, and using things like Trello boards and Miro boards for planning the project in a joint-up way. And we feel that these kind of tools will only be used more and more, especially in the current times of remote working that we find ourselves in. As I said at the start, that we wanted to work in an open and transparent way. And we feel we've achieved this by not only having these show and tells with open invitations for anyone to join, but we also created a website, the link to which can be found on the right-hand side of this slide, just underneath the picture. And this is up to date with the progress, and anyone can access it and view it. These show and tells are uploaded onto there as well. And we've also promoted the project on platforms such as LinkedIn and Twitter using the hashtag #RepairsOnline. And as mentioned, we held a Tech UK event with many suppliers to get their ideas and to discuss with them in the open. I'll now hand over back to Fraser, who will talk about what we've learned from our findings so far.
Cheers for that time, Sam. Not going to spend, sorry, could you just go back a slide for me now? Don't want to go too much in detail onto these because we'll be coming across some of these findings in a bit more detail in just a moment through the presentation. But we just wanted to talk about some of those things that perhaps as councils we can take some learning from that not just relate to this product and this project, and perhaps there's a specific one to this is that actually one size won't fit all with our solution. Whatever we can come up with here isn't going to be 100% solution for 100% of councils, and which kind of raises that question of, as a group, do we actually need to normalise or standardise our processes more to make the adoption of any changes such as this in the future easier for us to handle? We've been in what a minimum viable product could be, but again, this is different things to different people and to different organisations, and there's some elements that are really important to one council that are less so to another. When we've got to take into consideration things like external contractors, different suppliers, communal repairs are higher in some areas than others. So again, it's just that how can we wrap all of that up into a product that delivers something good for all of us, and how do we share those learnings and make them most useful to a broader audience? And that could be through creating an open API approach, but that does lead us to a question of, actually, as authorities, do we have the skills internally to support such technologies, and is it an area that we should be investing in a skill set? Okay, these are just kind of open questions that I'm leaving you on with at the moment, not looking for answers, but working with suppliers as well, it's been great and quite a rare opportunity for us to actually start talking with some of the suppliers at this more kind of strategic level, rather than just about our day-to-day issues or upgrade paths. And it's been great how open and willing everybody is to be part of that and to discuss ideas and how they can be helping us progress, not just with this project but with other items as well. And another learning from that for me was, should we be doing that more? Do we make the most of our user groups, etc.? Or is it a kind of a lost opportunity for us at the moment? So Wendy, over to you for looking forward.
Hi there. So following on from the end of this final stage, the next step is to await the final report from the technical alpha. And then as a team, the collaboration will need to review and understand the final report and consider any recommendations. We need to then reflect and analyse our options moving forward, discuss the findings of the report, obviously with the MHCLG, and work closely with them to clarify if there is a next phase, what it is, and identify any funding options that we need to consider. If there's any new partners that need to join or would like to join us, they're quite welcome to. They've got to be a local authority, and if they want to contact Fraser Trickett, I'm sure he'll be able to help them out on that one. Moving to the planning, the next project phase, and how to implement the MVP. We need to decide what systems we're going to be testing on. Obviously, all the councils seem to have a different layout of systems for this side of things. Initially, it'll be a private beta phase, just testing it in a small area with different iterations. Basically, watch this space, how we move forward with it. Thank you.
Cheers, Wendy. So yeah, that was just some of our kind of somewhat way philosophical thoughts from the project about how we as local authorities run. But let's get stuck into what we've been doing this sprint and focus back on this project. So we've, in these last couple of weeks, we've spoken to yet another major housing supplier. We've had cheers, Neil. Sorry, thank you. We ran a big session with Tech UK. We had real good attendance for that, and some great learnings came out of that. Based on the learnings we took from the previous sprint, we've added communal repairs into the prototype, and we actually started to investigate the potential of how our APIs might be called, and also started working on the alpha project. But talking about the API design, we'll hand over to Neil and Martin at that point. You're on mute at the moment, Neil.
Thanks. Can you hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so this sprint, we described an initial API which is kind of a set of messages that the council's back-end system would need to be able to understand from the service to support it. On the far right-hand side is a screenshot of a tool that we've used to specify this API. It's called Swagger. There's a link at the bottom. And essentially, it comes down to 3 main messages that would need to be available to support our service. And those are listed on the left. So first of all, we'd need to have a way to get a set of eligible addresses for a given postcode. That's so that the user can actually choose which property is relevant for the repair. And we would expect that each property would have a code, perhaps a UPRN, to uniquely identify it. Then later in the journey, once the user has actually selected different details about the repair that they need done, we'd want to be able to retrieve a set of available appointments. And we know that the scheduler or equivalent system that actually has this list of possible appointments, it needs to know 2 key pieces of information. It would need to know which trade or which speciality of the person doing the repair is needed. And they may also need the duration or the kind of predicted duration of the appointment to actually get the repair done. And those 2 key pieces of information should narrow down what appointment slots are available. And we wouldn't expect to get all appointments way off into the future all at the same time for performance reasons. Instead, we would want to have a sort of a page of results at a time. Then finally, once the user has completed more, they've input more information essentially, we would actually want to be able to send the repair data, the property data that was selected before, and any other information such as photos of the problem or any sort of text description such as kind of the duration of how long the repair or how long the problem has been going on for. And this is all kind of useful or potentially useful information, of course, for the person actually coming around to fix it. And key to that that message is that we'd get back a reference code, which is a confirmation. You can see that towards the bottom of the slide in green. That's a snapshot of our screenshot of our service, of course, and that would be, you know, tied to the reference code sent back from the API. So those are the main messages that we expect the backend to support for this service. Just to note that this doesn't include any sort of supporting tasks that might be useful. So for instance, the council might hold some information about property, such as the presence of a vulnerable person, perhaps, or cautionary contact, for instance. But that's not something, or at least the cautionary contact, that's not something that we would expect this service necessarily to provide. So this API description doesn't include kind of supporting information such as that.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. It's, hello, everyone. Martin here from Unboxed. Yeah, so as Neil's described, there are three key functions that the front end, the service pattern that we've created, would need to support it: get addresses, get appointments, and create books. And what we all know, obviously, is that there are many different systems behind the scenes. So each council has a different configuration of a housing management system, a scheduling system, maybe a CRM, a contractor management system, an asset management system. The key ones really are the housing management system and the scheduling system for this, for what we need at the moment. So we've thought about how we might map some of those back-end systems onto our requirements, the requirements of our API. The first example I've got here is a housing management system. It seems to have all the calls. I'm not quite sure exactly what they do from the documentation. We were hoping to have a test bed set up so that we could actually APIs, but that wasn't the suppliers. But you can see the area, so property search, get person details, get tenancy details. They all seem to at least provide to service the get addresses call. One thing I've noticed is that there's a separate kind of call to get tenancy details for a property. So our user experience might have to shift towards provide a postcode, get a list of addresses, choose an address, and then be told whether that address is a agreement and whether that person can report repairs for that property, which isn't ideal and not a great user experience. So somehow we'd need to get past that kind of hurdle. You'll also see from this that there's no obvious way from the housing management APIs to retrieve any kind of appointments. So it kind of falls at that point. We do know that housing management systems have their own scheduling systems and they do integrate with other scheduling systems, but there's no API documentation as to how we would get those appointments. If we look in the second example, there is a scheduling system who we've been talking to, and they provide API documentation also. Now, from the scheduling system perspective, there's no way that they can obviously provide address information, but they can raise an order, they can raise a job, they can provide a list of appointments, and they can schedule a booking. So what we're trying to do is simplify it, and we've talked a bit about whether we can just hit one system and let that system talk to the other back office systems to get what it needs. And it looks like scheduling systems are quite good at that. They can communicate with the housing management system, for example. But again, not entirely clear from the documentation, and we couldn't get a test environment set up easily. The last example I've got here is from the Hackney Repairs API. Now, Hackney have an in-house team, a large in-house team, and they're committed to creating an API layer that ties together all their internal back office systems. They have built API layer that hooks into some, I think, universal housing and some other systems, and it does deliver a very similar experience to the one that's outlined in our service pattern. So we do know it is possible, but we also know that not every council has the kind of resources on this kind of thing. So there's plenty of challenges ahead in terms of actually implementing, but this is just a snapshot of where we are at the moment. Thank you, Neil.
Okay, so moving on to our insights from these past couple of weeks. If you could go on to the next slide for me, Neil. Thank you very much. So I think one of the key takeaways we've got is that the systems and processes that we have at the moment are often built around the needs of us as the authority, not those around the needs of the customers. And one of the key kind of thinking behind that is the forcing of a login at the moment. And we're often asked that, well, what if somebody reports a fake repair? And this is seen as the way to prevent that. But it's something that could happen now over the phone. And actually, for authorities that have taken away that as a mandatory part of the process, there's been no actual evidence of people going rogue, creating lots of fake repairs. So it's one of those that leaves us with that question of actually, just should we be more optimistic to how people and customers are going to use this service rather than the tentative nature that we perhaps normally take? I mean, hold our hands up and say that putting a login around it might make some elements of the process cleaner and might be able to enrich that experience or offer more information, but for the most part, it's not something that's needed, certainly for just logging a repair. Thinking about how this can actually be implemented now and what we're thinking about, and taking our common service pattern in mind, that many aspects of it, the learnings that we already have, could be implemented now. There's a lot of the out there systems that do offer a level of customization, but it needs to be consistent user journey for residents as well as the back office. So creating a standard would help that uniform approach to both back office staff who will be able to use the service for log and repair as well as themselves. Go to move on to next now. Something that's often a barrier as in terms of the upfront logging process is the SOR that we need to attribute to a repair in order to be able to specify the trade, the time, etc. in this. But we often find as well that this actually there's an increased risk of error, and that picking the wrong SOR might not give enough time. And because of the complexities of the back end of SORs with thousands of codes, picking that right one might mean the wrong trade, etc. And if we think about ourselves, if we want a repair to our own house, we never go down to this degree of classification before actually getting the trade out. If a tap's dripping in our properties, we might just ring a plumber and say, I've got a dripping tap. We don't go down into the questions of, well, what millimeter pipe is it going into it? What type of tap is it? Is it a drip from the behind the tap? Is it on front of it? There's all sorts of questions that we seem to have to ask at the moment to get down to the nitty gritty of an SOR. So that's definitely driving a type of behaviour. And looking even between the partners, out of the four of us, we've all got a different use of these SORs. Only Lincoln and Southwark at the moment are currently using that full set. And out of our top 50 SORs that we use, only 12 of those match. So automatically it makes the adoption of this really difficult. And so we're definitely thinking about the possibilities of actually what is important to the customer at this point in the login process. And to them, it's that the right trade turns up with an appropriate amount of time to complete the work. We'd wholly accept that SORs are important for the back end processing, but putting customer needs at the front of this, it's not important to the customer. So SORs can be attributed to the job post completion, so that we have good information around being able to benchmark, etc. on there. And we know from speaking to one of the scheduling suppliers that in order for them to create a job, it's not reliant on an SOR. They just need, as we've just described in the APIs, the postcode, what trade it is, and a small, medium or large kind of slot. And that would be enough for the customer to create an appointment at a chosen time, and for us to have the right information to send somebody out, especially as we take into other aspects of the common service pattern that we've designed, where we can upload photos, and even thinking about the opportunities of offering a potential online diagnosis, so somebody can use video servicing to see what that repair might be. At that point, I'll hand over to Jide.
Thanks, Fraser. So just off the back of the conversation surrounding SORs, we also looked at, and we have always looked at, how repairs are booked. And there's a conception, belief that improving the repair booking service may actually improve the overall service. However, that the previous alpha has shown that there have been a high volume of calls received by most councils where tenants are actually chasing updates about existing repairs, and it's not so much about a new repair. So this can be as a result of things just falling apart, where the actual repair journey is not clear to the customer, also where the repair has actually been progressed to a certain stage, but then the follow-up hasn't been documented well, or hasn't been actually moved between existing systems in a way that it's been seamless, or it's been lost along the way. So this is effectively sometimes a lack of transparency between the different parts of the repair system and those repairs being dropped either before completion, full completion, and then manual processes being involved. So where the repair service is not an end-to-end experience and there's a manual intervention, which is to match data, that also can result in failure of repairs. So once the repair has been diagnosed and booked, the main thing would be the communication through the user journey. So in other words, keeping customers apprised of what the progress of their repair. This would prevent the calls, a lot of the calls that come in. So preventing those chasing calls would save a lot of money. And in fact, in certain scenarios, possibly as much as actually moving repairs completely online. Thank you. So the conclusion also within the whole process has been that SORs can actually, sorry, that's the wrong slide. I need to go the other way. That's it, thanks. So the conclusion has been that, can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Existing repair systems often carry significant technical debt. What that actually means, and this is an observation, was that delivery repairs, because there's a combination of different systems, which can be the in-house housing system, contractor management, schedulers, mobile working, and there's so many overlays and integrations involved. This complication can actually lead to that technical debt that we've noticed. So the key information, for instance, relating to asbestos or tenants may also be drawn from further systems. We found that in certain authorities. So that's another complexity. And it's not just only asbestos or tenants, there may be supplementary information required to complete the repair or to take the repair forward, which then is outside the existing system, and that has to be drawn in. So contractors also, in their own particular scenarios, maintain duplicate records of details which are held on housing management systems. So this again creates that complexity. And the web of integrations, which I've already mentioned, between the different systems is typically complex. And we try to represent that on the right here with these network diagrams and diagrams of two different systems, which show complexity can create a barrier to staff actually understanding what's actually going on with their systems and being able to unpick and unravel how their systems are actually working and integrating with each other. So then any further integrations become even more difficult and actually quite expensive, because there's a heavy reliance on external organizations, external suppliers coming in and giving an understanding of what the existing integrations are and how to introduce new integrations into those systems. Can I have the next slide, please? So one of the further insights that we had was around how repairs are currently centered around the housing management system, and we felt that this wasn't necessary in all cases. So key things to remember are that to book a repair, the address, time slot, repair type, and contact details are the key pieces of information that are required. Further relevant information doesn't really need to be collected at that time. So after booking, more information is needed. So asbestos information and cautionary flags. Asbestos sometimes comes from an asset management system, and some contractors, as I've said, are keeping their own lists of cautionary flags. But this data does need to flow in from somewhere. Often this is the housing management system, but not always. So it might be beneficial to move architecture to something that is more domain driven. So there are questions around that. So current repair records are first created in the housing management system, which then feeds workflows into other systems. Again, this does create complexity by putting additional systems and messaging between the resident and their goal, which is effectively to get an appointment and get an appointment confirmed. So integrating repairs and ordering directly to the scheduler would help create a simpler architecture. And we have a couple of quotes here who said that one of our interviewees was clear that their staff wanted to use the same service residents have, which makes perfect sense when you think about it, because then they know what the residents are seeing, they can act on behalf of residents. It gives a homogeneous experience, not only for internal users, but external users. And And I'll hand over now to Tom, I believe.
Cool. Thanks, Jared. So the final insight we had, and this is going way beyond the scope of what this project's actually about, is whether housing management systems actually need to exist at all. And so, as Jared was saying, repairs don't need to be centred around the housing system. They can be centred around like the scheduler or the workforce management system. The thing that keeps tying us back to the HMS is financial data and the requirement for that to be used for looking at things like total cost of ownership for block, calculating service charges, etc. Once you start looking at things being, okay, it's just financial data we need to export from the repairs system, you then kind of start asking questions about, well, where's the best place that finance data should live? Should it be in the HMS or should it actually be in a proper financial management system? Once you start pulling on that thread, you then start to ask some questions about what a housing management system actually is. And it's basically a big monolithic ERP application. It consists of an asset database, it consists of case management, document management, financial management functionality. But each of these functions could be performed better by specialist systems, and in each of the markets these specialist systems exist in, there's typically more competition, which has driven up standards, driven down prices. And so what we are seeing in the sector is some housing providers are now starting to kind of drift away from that typical HMS approach, and people looking at bespoke builds. In the case of Notting Hill Genesis and Hackney, Adrian Worthing have done a lot of work with a low-code platform called Liberty, and there's a growing number of MS Dynamics consultancies as well, kind of creating alternatives to traditional HMS on that platform. So it's something to kind of bear in mind, whereas I think the current approach providing IT into the social housing sector kind of reflects the thinking about how applications should be built of like 10, 20 years ago. It probably isn't reflective of what we'd now consider a best practice around building applications. Cool. Next slide, please, Neil. Cool. And one more. So recommendations, these aren't really recommendations as yet. We haven't decided what recommendations are, but there's a few options that we're discussing at the moment. So the first one is around supporting what's available. So over the course of this project, we spoke to two existing portal suppliers, and both of them have expressed some interest in like adopting what we've learned in the service pattern into their product. One of them has independently on us actually identified a lot of the best practices that we did. The issue they've had, however, is that when they've tried to present these to their clients have pushed back, and it's the clients that have been saying, we want people to log in, we want people to have like this kind of big portal account, which is quite damaging to usability, but suits business goals more than it does resident goals. So I think there's work we can do here to kind of keep expanding on the pattern, keep working with these portal suppliers to kind of get them to adopt the elements into it. They've both kind of offered to do some kind of proof of concept work and give us quotes around this. Unfortunately, the timelines of the project are such that we've not been able to do it in time for this presentation, but it's something we can explore further in the report. For this to work, however, there needs to be a lot more support for councils, and you kind of need to make sure that the councils that are going out to the market to purchase these products are kind of well versed in what user-centered design is and how to create the most usable products to do the best things for their residents, rather than continuing to prioritise the needs of the organisation. Next slide, please. So second option we're looking at is around whether we build a new product. So we could create an open source product which would look at kind of repairs, ordering and tracking. It wouldn't be fully featured as some existing portal providers that do a lot of other things as well, but it would kind of provide like a very focused and very targeted lower cost approach for councils that demonstrates that user-centered design principles can work in repairs reporting. It would essentially kind of set a minimum standard in the market to say to people, this thing exists, it's really high quality, it's open source, anybody can pick it up. If you want to compete in this market, you need to do something better than this. And so I think there's kind of a lot of value in doing that. I think the disadvantage in this is that probably to create something of really high quality would mean that we have to take quite strong positions on, e.g. the use of SOR codes and whether they should be created at the point of diagnosis or done later in the process. That may limit the how appealing it is to some councils that are particularly wedded to that approach. So you just need to bear that in mind. So yeah, the next option, please. So the third option we had builds on the work that Neil and Martin discussed earlier around a common API. We think that we could make it a lot easier for the sector generally if we could kind of have a common API pattern that was shared between different systems. The idea behind this is that if we can expose data in a consistent way across different systems, it becomes much easier to slot different systems in and out. What this then means in turn is that we can hopefully make it much easier for new suppliers with innovative products around things maybe like IoT devices to come into the market, because rather than having to tailor their product for every single variety of housing management system and contractor system and scheduling system that might be there, there's a common surface they can hit. And in turn as well, this would also support some of the things coming out from the Hackett report about kind of creating a golden thread of building data. If we can get really easy access to understand what materials have been used in what repairs on what buildings, it becomes much easier to kind of monitor health and safety issues in future. The disadvantage of this is that larger suppliers are kind of financially disincentivized to do this. The easier we make it to kind of access data in these systems, the easier it is to migrate away from them. And so doing this chips away at the vendor lock-in. So I think, although I think this could be a really good idea, I think what will probably happen is smaller vendors might adopt it as a way of differentiating themselves, but the big vendors that have most of their customers on the market would probably not do so. So it may not work particularly successfully. Then final option, please. The way to approach this problem would be to actually go a bit further beyond just designing an API and look to actually build. And so in this, we would have our defined API layer, but then going beyond that, we'd start saying, okay, how would this connect to the existing APIs that exist around a current system? And essentially, we'd have to start kind of like back engineering API connectors onto the web services that exist on products like Capita, Civica, Orchard, Northgate, whoever. Hopefully, if we did that for a few of the big suppliers, it might then encourage smaller suppliers to adopt it voluntarily. There are always going to be some issues around local configurations of systems going to be slightly different between different councils, but I think this could break the back of kind of the problem around integrations, if not completely solve it. I think probably the biggest challenge around this is it needs to be a long-term commitment. It's not going to be easy to do this just with the sheer volume of different services on the market. But it is doable. Kind of the point is being, or the concept's been proven at Hackney and Bristol. They've kind of taken this approach with some of the digital services they've been building. So it's not like something that is technically beyond us, but it's just about having the will to push forward with it. I think the next slice is back to Fraser.
Thank you very much. So yeah, just moving on to our next steps. I think we need to just digest those recommendations together and just go over some of the details that we've got from this sprint before we can publish our final report. And we'll be sharing that with you as soon as we can on the website. And if you've got any questions in the meantime, you can email either myself or Tom, or if you want to make sure that you get a copy, you can ask us and we'll send it out to you as soon as possible. Next slide, please, Neil, which I think is just any questions. So if you can use the raise hand option in Teams, we'll try and field those through. David, did you want to go? Sorry, I could just see your hand.
Hi there, hi. Apologies, my camera's not working. Hello. So I work for a contractor that services contracts for councils effectively. So I'm a step down the line. We actually work for Southwark. One thing you kind of spent some time on was sort of mapping the APIs, and you sort of touched on how complex that could be. I wonder if you know, some of the edge cases are actually even more complex than what you mentioned. You know, you talk about a housing management system being where a call's loaded. It depends who owns the call centre. If the council owns the whole call centre, then it originates in the HMS, but quite often the contractor owns the call centre. So the call would actually start in their system and interface back to the HMS. So there's one complication there. And obviously, depending, you talk about trades being important, they can also be important because when you're going to select or you get to the point where you want to look at an appointment, depending on the trade, that could have to go to any number of different contractors, or you know, it could be different contractors servicing those trades for a council. So the back end, that API would have to be mapped to a different system based on what the trade is. So I'm just really kind of pointing those sorts of things out from my experience, that the mapping of APIs can be a hugely complex thing, really. Not to mention they could all have different authentication models. You talk about supporting an API endpoint, but there's always authorization on top of that as well. Wondering if you've covered that in your thoughts.
Thanks, David. Yeah, one of the things perhaps didn't mention earlier as well is that suppliers are at different kind of life cycles on how open those APIs are, and some suppliers are actually quite open and that they're more up to date and provide RESTful APIs over the SOAP, etc. So yeah, you're quite right that there's loads of levels of complexity within this, and I think that brings us back to that element that in order for us to move forward on this in our first instance, we're not going to be able to solve every type of repair for every type of authority, but we will be looking at making that as easily adoptable, if you will, by the suppliers, so that we can start to put pressure on the market for them to hopefully want to use this. I know that through Southwark as well, we've been talking with some of the contractors to get their perspective on it. Tom, I don't know if you can add anything to that aspect.
Cool. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, these are kind of things circulating around the back of my head. As well as this project, we're working on another project with Hackney, which is looking specifically at how they get information or how they get repairs they've diagnosed as being needed to be done by a contractor into contractor systems. And yeah, you're right, it's tricky, and there's always different authentication models, there's all these different kind of lookups that need to be done to work out which contractor should be receiving which job under which circumstances. I guess the detail of that is kind of a bit beyond the scope of this project, but it is something we're kind of aware that we need to look at more.
Okay, that's great. Just really pointing out, agreeing with you how complex it can be, and how brave you are to take this on. Really, it's something that's a great, simple idea, but anything where you're trying to integrate lots of systems together is always a challenge. So,
yeah, exactly.
You're very brave.
If it was easy, somebody would have done it already, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers, David. Devine?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you fine.
Great. Really interesting findings. This is very much a groundbreaking kind of approach, and I think you recognise that, and I've talked about the challenges of adoption for councils. There was just a question that I wanted to ask, going back to Jade's slide, where he made reference to having a system that was domain based, I just wanted to get a bit more clarity of what he meant by that. I couldn't quite keep up with the concept, what he was trying to say, and I wonder if he could explain that a little bit more, or somebody could explain a little bit more what that means.
Which slide were you referring to me?
There was, you were talking, I don't know what number slide it was, but you were talking about, I think were you talking about simplifying the process and having something a bit, you used the expression domain based.
So I think I was talking about the housing management system. So is that where I said that the repairs don't necessarily need to be centered around the house?
Yeah. And
this was just by looking at how different systems or repairs journeys occurred across partner authorities, and in fact I think we even went further than just the partners. We spoke to other authorities, and part of the common process was that to book a repair, the required information was the address, time slot, repair type, and contact details. Mm-hmm. But then it was found that most of the further information wasn't really necessary until after the repair was booked. Mm-hmm. And because currently repair records are first created in the housing management system, which then feeds workflows into other systems.
Yes.
So this actually increases complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. And I get it, is it sort of leading into the point of having a series of separate systems as opposed to one sort of giant housing management system that does all things?
Yeah, I think that was we were looking at the complexity, and then we felt that integrating the repairs ordering directly to the scheduler would help create simpler architecture and process, as it were.
Martin, have you got something to add to that one?
Yeah, I was just gonna. I think it's really more. I think there's a previous slide around how systems tend to be designed for the way councils organise themselves,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the thing that the end user is trying to do. I think that's when sometimes when we talk about domain-driven design, it's about it's more the domain being what is it that the user is trying to achieve, rather than what are the different components that deliver it. So, for example, making a payment, the council might think about payments have to come into our account system, so we need a payment system, whereas paying your rent is very different to paying a parking fine, or it's thinking about things from those kind of the actions of the user. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a very different way of thinking about things, and I think just helping those of us that have been in the sector for a long time and have kind of always worked in a certain way to get our heads around this concept, because it is very novel in our sector, and it's just kind of getting your head around it. Yeah, but thank you.
Okay.
Is there any more questions from anyone? Okay, right then, well, I assume that's it. We will be publishing the show and tell on our website. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for taking the time out this afternoon, not just today, but in the previous sessions, and for those who contributed to interviews, to surveys, etc. It's been great. I think we're all probably quite sad to be getting to the end of this project now. It's become somewhat a labour of love, but we'll be really pleased to share the results and findings with you as soon as we can. So with that, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.